Exclusive insights, actionable strategies, and ideas that ignite change. You're listening to the Ivey Impact Podcast from Ivey Business School.
Hello and welcome to Dialogue with the Dean, the inaugural series on the Ivey Impact Podcast. I'm Julian Birkinshaw, Dean of the Ivey Business School. In this series, I speak with Ivey's leading faculty to explore the research shaping business and society today. On this episode, we're looking at what happens when finance meets the climate crisis and when Indigenous leadership reshapes how we think about value, stewardship, and sustainability. My guest today is Diane-Laure Arjaliès, Associate Professor of Managerial Accounting and Control and Sustainability, and the founder and lead researcher of Ivey's Sustainable Finance Lab. Her latest work focuses on the Deshkan Ziibi Conservation Impact Bond, a pioneering collaboration between Indigenous and non-Indigenous partners in southwest Ontario. It's a bold experiment in reimagining conservation finance, not as a tool for extraction, but as a vehicle for restoration, relationships, and reconciliation. Diane-Laure, welcome to Dialogue with the Dean. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you.
So we will start, as we usually do, with just a little bit about your background and what brought you to Ivey in the first place.
Yeah, so I'm a French person and also French-Canadian, and I was doing my studies in Paris at ESSEC Business School. Mm-hmm. And then I started my tenure track at HEC Paris. Mm-hmm. And I happened to go to a conference at Harvard on sustainability. And there I met Tima Bensel.
Wow.
And so I came back to Paris and I said, to everybody asked me, so what about Harvard? I say, it was good, but I discovered Ivey and a group of people there. And they're really, really cool. Yeah. And then a few months later, Tima came to me and she told me, we're opening a position. And I was like, okay, you look great to me. And so I decided to cross the ocean.
Wonderful. We're going to crack open a number of your studies in some depth, but let's just start at the broad level. Sustainable finance, what do we mean by that? Because that's a pretty broad term.
So what we call sustainable finance is quite easy, is how we put finance at the service of the sustainable real economy. Right. So basically you put the capital markets, the valuation, the allocation of capital toward the financing of sustainable real economy, not speculation, not short term. And so sustainable finance is any means, any type of financial instruments, any accounting practice that's going to be conducive to this goal.
Right. And we'll get into this later in some detail, but the immediate question some finance people have is, why should I be putting my money into stuff which almost by definition is not going to give me such a good return, or at least a much slower return?
So it's always like the 1 million question. Right. So what's going to give you returns? And I think there have been strong meta-analysis right now over the past 2 decades that show that what we call also ESG, environmental, social, and governance criteria, or responsible investment, doesn't prevent you from making money. So you're not going to earn more money, but you're going to earn less money. Right. But what you have to think is sustainable finance is not for the short-term speculators. Right. Sustainable finance is really for asset owners, universal owners like pension funds, institutional investors like bank or asset management companies. Those are people who have large portfolios, who have some time horizon that can be sometimes 5 years, 10 years, sometimes 20 years, 25 years if you're pension funds. And if you're in this situation, you need to manage your risk and your portfolio in a way that returns will be generated over time on a regular basis.
Today, we're not focusing on that. I think of that more as, if you like, passive investing in sustainable activities. Today is much more about active investing. In other words, doing something actively with money in order to make a difference. Before we get into a specific project, you run our Sustainable Finance Lab. Presumably that lab is all about doing research in this area, or is it actually about trying to influence practice?
So it's both. It's a living lab. So what we do is that we develop research partnerships. And so we try new type of financial products, new type of accounting incentives as well. And we test them with partners. But what we really focus on 3 topics. We focus on nature-based solutions, economic reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and gender-lens investing.
Perfect. Which is a nice segue to the specific project we're going to talk about. Deshkan Ziibi Conservation Impact Bond. We need to unpack that term. Let's first of all, what do we mean? What is Deshkan Ziibi?
So Deshkan Ziibi is the Ojibwe name for the Thames River here in London, Ontario. It's also the name for Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, Deshkan Ziibi. So it's important that we use the original name because that was an English name brought by colonists.
Indeed. And I, moving from one London to the other,
Right.
I now live on the River Thames as I think of it. But you're right. There's an original name, and that's what Deshkan Ziibi means. Apologize if I'm pronouncing it
So
wrong.
you're living on Deshkan Ziibi River.
I did not know
This is
that.
what you could say. No?
Okay, I will start saying that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, conservation impact bond. So, that is a term which most people do not understand. So, let's unpack that.
So we know from the research, and there have been a few articles published in Nature by conservation biologists, we know that the best way to be climate resilient is to bring back nature. You know, that's the best sequestration way of carbon. You put a forest, you put a wetland, it sequesters carbon and it releases oxygen. It's almost free. It's fantastic. The issue is nobody wants to finance nature because it's cheap.
Right.
And basically you could build real estate, you could build industrial land instead, and you can make a lot of money of that land. So what would you protect it?
One of the quotes in one of your articles, a dead tree is worth more than a living tree. Right?
Exactly.
If that's your kind of worldview. Right?
Yeah, and that's true. So that tree is worth more than a tree that is alive. So what we try to do with conservation finance, or we call that also nature-based solution finance, is how we're going to reverse this. How we're going to put value on trees that are alive. Not only commodities you can sell and transform. Right. So what happened is when we work on nature-based solutions, we need to find some financial instruments where we're going to create a transaction of some sort where some people will be willing to pay for the protection and the restoration, and some people are going to be willing to pay those investors for their investment. Right. So that's what we'll do with a conservation impact bond. It's a pay-for-performance product. So we have investors, they're going to pay upfront for the restoration, protection. And then we have outcome payers or accelerators. Those are not going to pay for financial returns. They're going to pay for non-financial returns. So the social returns, the environmental returns. So they still have returns. They're just not like monetary returns.
Right. So the first group on the left of the diagram, in my mind, you've got financial investors who, as we talked about earlier, are expecting to get a return on that investment. They're taking some risk. Yeah. That is money at risk. But assuming the project works out, they will get a return.
Yeah, a financial return.
A financial return. And it's usually, this is positioned as a bond, is it? So they're getting a yield on a bond.
Yeah, it's going to follow the yield on the bond market.
Okay,
yeah.
Good. But on the other side of the diagram, you've got these impact investors, whatever you call them. What is the return that they're getting? Because are they getting some sort of, is it a philanthropic thing whereby we're doing it for the good of society rather than for the good of our financial bottom line?
So we call them outcome payers because they pay for outcomes, or accelerators because they help accelerate the restoration of the land. So those people or organizations vary in their motivations. Okay, so we might have people who do that because they believe in it, like might be philanthropic or they just love nature. So they're just going to do it as a foundation. Yep. And they'd rather do the impact bond because they're going to pay only if it's successful. So it's a non-risk investment for them. So unlike a grant, when you give the grant to a non-for-profit, you don't know whether it's going to be successful.
Okay, so you've still got to believe that doing this is the right thing, but there is at least some sort of incentive sort of built into the system that makes sure that it delivers on its objectives.
Yeah. So those people were like foundations. They're gonna pay for it and it's gonna pay only if it's successful. It's a pay for performance, and the success is being told by the impact metrics that we help design at Ivey. But we also have two different types of organizations that are not philanthropic. You have high net worth individual, but you also have corporations who might have an interest, like here you can imagine in southwestern Ontario, which is the most biodiverse place in Canada, but also where the freshwater reserve, the biggest one in the world, And so we have a lot of factories coming here to have access to water, It's really a key asset. So there might be corporations like factories who want to have a well-functioning green infrastructure because they rely on water. You can have agri-food companies that rely on the pollinators. So they are likely to invest in this product because, again, it's only if it's successful. They pay only if it's successful, and they can guarantee them a well-functioning green infrastructure. And the last type of people who invest in as outcome payers are the governments. So again, for the governments, they like it because they have objectives. So the Canadian government, as many OECD countries, have 30 by 30, which is the protection of 30% of lands and waters by 2030. And again, for them, it's great. They pay only if it's successful, and they don't take the risk.
Okay, so that's a conservation impact bond.
Yes.
And my understanding is this is quite a pioneering approach that you've taken here. And it's an attempt, as you say, to use sort of financial capital, which is used to doing things in a different way, and applying it to take conservation seriously. And what does success look like in terms of conservation? I mean, is it just, are we replanting? Are we just simply defending the natural habitat? I genuinely do not know.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because conservation has been a really colonial practice. It's definitely the settlers came, and the first national parks was Yellowstone, and the idea was to keep intact this land of terrain for the next settlers. There was this notion of protection of national parks. And so the idea of protection and conservation in the Western perspective was you're going to put human beings aside and you're going to let nature be. The truth is that is not the most efficient way, especially here because you have human beings. And there's also some research that shows that if you're able to name plants, the plants are more likely to survive because you pay attention to them. So if you recognize plants or trees, you're going to build a relationship and you're going to be more careful about the world that surrounds you. So the approach of success and the way we do it is not only about planting. Of course, you have to get ecosystems, but it's about restoring the relationships. The relationship between ecosystems together. So for instance, you have some nations in part of the region that might have native plants, and we're going to take those seeds and bring them to the other part of the region because they need some diversity of genetic here. So we have relationship between ecosystems themselves, building ecosystem corridors. So one of the things we're working on is having corridors so the animals can cross the region. And you might not know, but animals can actually cross London. So that's why sometimes you have bear that are lost here during the summer. It comes from north, but deers. So this notion of relationship of ecosystems, but also the notion of relationship between people and the ecosystems. So human beings and the ecosystems, but also Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples as a reconciliation.
And we'll come to the Indigenous people point in the next segment, but you're essentially measuring biodiversity as one of your indicators. Am I correct?
Yeah. So we have 5, and this impact assessment has been designed as a co-creation with the different partners. So everyone was at the table: the financier, the conservationist from a Western science perspective, the conservationist from an Indigenous science perspective, us, of course. And what we agreed upon, we did what we call a thorough change, which is basically what does success look like and how do we achieve this success? And as we were working on that, we actually designed 5 type of metrics, and each metric goes through relationship. So one will be like connecting opportunities, because also one of the success is to create jobs.
Yeah, for sure.
So this project has created jobs. We created, for instance, that it succeeded to create the Land Guardian project, which is use people of the Thames First Nations who are being paid to steward the lands, It's also nature connectedness, the relationship build. Of course, the number of hectares planted, which is good with native species, but it's more broad. It's broader than just the plantation.
And so you've been working on this project for 4 or 5 years or whatever. I mean, where have we got to? I think you said that as a pilot, it has succeeded. Is this something that's now being done in other parts of Canada? Yeah,
so that was the first pilot. The second pilot was Long Point, and it has been successful as well. And now we're working on a zone-wide CIB, which will be like all the regions, so something at the larger scale. It's interesting is that it's become a blueprint for the federal government. We've been contacted by people in BC were interested in launching this fund. We've been contacted by other organizations, even in New Zealand, Australia. And I think what was of inspiration to those people is that it was community-led, and it was two-way sync. So they have an Indigenous-led and a Western lens.
Yep.
And I think this is really what attracted people.
Got it. And I mean, for me, the thing I find attractive here is that this is an innovative approach to solving a problem that we all recognize, trying to kind of use, if you like, traditional financial kind of instruments, but using them in a creative way to do things which we couldn't do before. So I do think it's a fascinating model. And I'm going to now switch to almost the other side of this project, because you've touched on the fact that this was done in collaboration with Indigenous people, Chippewas of the Thames and others. You use this concept of two-eyed seeing, which I think basically means that there's, one eye is our kind of almost like traditional Western capitalist mindset. The other eye is presumably an Indigenous worldview about how we as humans sort of interact with nature. Is that right?
Yeah, so two-eye seeing at the point is a Mi'kmaq concept, and it was coined by Elder Albert Marshall and Mi'kmaq and so Nova Scotia. So it's really important to acknowledge where this concept comes from and bring back to the Indigenous elder who designed this. And the idea of the concept is that you're going to have the best of Western knowledge and the best of Indigenous knowledge, and we're going to combine it for improved outcomes for everyone. So to get a better world,
And the part of the paper I found particularly interesting is you talk about the sort of the extractive mindset, if you like, that's sort of embedded in a lot of capitalist thinking, which is that, we are getting value out of the land by extracting minerals and growing crops and stuff. And you're, I think, saying that a regenerative mindset, perhaps that's not quite the right word, but a regenerative mindset rather than an extractive mindset is a hugely complementary point of view for us to understand things better. Is that right?
And I think many resources are natural resources.
Right.
So if you were not extracted them beyond the rates of regeneration, you will have them forever.
Right.
One of the issues is that human beings have extracted natural resources in a way that was totally at over capacity. And so this is what we had in Newfoundland. There was no more cuts, and the fisheries collapsed and the community collapsed, It could have been well managed, so we would have cuts forever. So first we have to make the distinction between natural resources that can be renewed. A lot of resources are like this, and natural resources, like once you took them, like fossil fuel, that forever gone, So for the natural resources that can be renewed, and there's a pace of regeneration, then the idea is how are you gonna respect this? How are you gonna share your extractive models in a way that's gonna protect the regeneration of the ecosystems?
Right. As you think that through, and as I say, you've got this beautiful example of a practical project that is seeking to essentially bring together traditional financial investors with people who are concerned about the community. How do we take that two-eyed seeing into other aspects of what we teach at business school?
Yeah, and so last summer we had a reconciling workshop. So we were co-teaching with leaders from Indigenous communities, so Indigenous elders, but Indigenous knowledge holders, and us as faculty, and we did co-taught for 1 week.
So you had our students in a room with you as alongside?
Yes, we had Ivey students and we had also Indigenous students, also from communities. So it was a very fantastic experience, both for our students and their use. And so we were co-teaching during the full week. Wow. And so we could teach the same case, but through different lenses. Right. So we have already done it, so we can do it again.
And how did that work? Because I mean, it's... For the students who are used to a particular worldview, this must have been a bit of a shock, and it takes quite a lot of time to not always just sort of try to bring everything back to your starting point. I mean, what we're trying to teach, I think, is critical thinking. We're trying to service assumptions. We're trying to show that there's more than one way of viewing a problem, and I guess that's what you were you were trying to do that.
Yeah, I mean, first there's a truth and reconciliation process to which the universities have committed. Right. And so it's a political requirement, and it's also a constitutional right. So I think it's our duty as well to open our teaching, our research, impact towards reconciliation and inclusion of Indigenous voices in a way that empower them instead of subjugating them. So that's the first reason why we should do that. Is it easy? No. Are we facing a new forms of teaching, a new form of research? For sure. And then we have to investigate with our Indigenous partners to try to find the right space, to find the right way of inviting Western listeners to the audience as well. So it's really a lot of listening. It's a lot of trying as well. But I think what matters as well for our students is that they come prepared. So we prepare them a bit in advance, because you have to be somehow educated. Yeah. To be frank, when they embark onto this journey, if they're really genuinely interested in listening, then they really change for the better. They're really enriched and they see things differently. And again, we're in this situation right now. Like, I know we've been talking a lot about the U.S. and the economic recession. I mean, we have Indigenous partners, communities in these countries that know a lot about resilience. Yeah, exactly. They have a lot to teach to us. They are the steward of most of the biodiversity left on the planet. The Haudenosaunee here with Oneida Nation of the Thames, they're known for being the longest democracy in practice in the world, So I think they can tell us also about democratic practices. So it's just about also us listening to them, learning, but also making room for them to empower the communities and be active actors there.
So there's a lot we've covered today. Let me just ask you for a couple of parting thoughts. If there's one kind of key insight from the conversation, the earlier part of the conversation, that listeners should take away, what's that?
Yeah, I think the listeners like the importance of financing nature-based solutions. I think it's really important that people realize that we need to invest in our green infrastructure, and then to do it, especially in Canada, but also in Australia, New Zealand, South America, we need to really bring alongside our Indigenous partners. Again, there's 6% of the population worldwide, and there's towards of 80% of the biodiversity left on the planet. So 6% and 80%. So clearly they have some knowledge. So we're not going to be able to fight this climate crisis and biodiversity loss crisis alone. We need everyone at the table. We need the investors. We need accelerators. We need researchers. It's probably the largest crisis we'll have never seen. Biodiversity loss is even more difficult than the climate crisis, and it's going to be essential for our success as a society, but also for it's giving our food, it's giving our medicine, it's giving everything, to us. So we need to really work together toward this and invent new ways of doing it.
That's right. And what are you working on now? Is this I'm guessing there's a huge research agenda around this that you're carrying on with.
So as I said, at the lab, we're working on nature-based solutions, so conservation finance, but also we're working on regenerative agriculture, because of course helping farmers transition from industrial farming to more regenerative practices is really important for our food sovereignty, but also for biodiversity loss. We're working also on economic reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. So right now we have a project and we're looking at what happens on capital markets and how Indigenous partners are being bring forward or not, and what we could do about it. And we're just launching with Laura Stanfield a new trend, which is gender lens investing, which might be with VC.
Wonderful. And that will be a topic for another podcast, no doubt. Thanks. You've been listening to Dialogue with the Dean from Ivey Business School. My sincere thanks to Diane-Laure Arjaliès for sharing her insights and valuable work at the intersection of sustainable finance, conservation, and Indigenous leadership. And thank you for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more conversations with Ivey faculty on the ideas shaping business and society. Until next time, goodbye.
This was Dialogue with the Dean, an Ivey Impact Podcast series. For more insights from Ivey, including thought leadership on critical issues and additional podcast episodes, visit ivyimpact.ca or subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Thanks for tuning in.